Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, January the 26th, 2026. A lot of sixes there. And I was thinking back, not that I was alive, but I was looking back to Valentine's Day 1862. That was quite a long time ago. So Valentine's Day 1862 was special because on that day Neptune moved into Aries, and of course today Neptune moves into Aries. And I was looking at what was going on February 1862, and one thing that happened was that a song got published, and I think that this song, its opening lines seem to maybe sum up what Neptune in Aries might all be about. And that song is pretty famous, and it is the Battle Hymn of the Republic. So the Battle Hymn of the Republic, very much associated with the abolitionist cause during the American Civil War, and it was not just the song that became very important in the US. I remember when I was at school, that was one of the hymns that was sometimes sung in chapel. I went to a school where there were sort of compulsory church services, I think sort of 6 days a week. Perhaps that says something about my relationship to Christianity. So, just a reminder, the Battle Hymn of the Republic has as its first few lines, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on." And I think that might say something about Neptune in Aries, and remembering that Neptune is now going to be in Aries for quite a long time, until the late 2030s. And so in this video I will be talking about Neptune in Aries in some detail, but before I specifically look at this sign change, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, January 26, 2026. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time. And don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as this chart is concerned, this is obviously the beginning of a new week, and the moon is in the middle of Taurus, so a very fixed place for the moon to be in. Now, I know that we don't really have a lot of Earth in general at the moment, so we're very much relying on the moon to provide us with grounding. And we have got the moon in Taurus. And so, with the moon in Taurus, well, the moon is exalted in Taurus, and it's in a good position. So, in spite of the fact that we have 5 planets in Aquarius, 5 planets in Aquarius can be a bit crazy in terms of the mind-body split, having a lot of ideas. The mind can appear to predominate, but moon in Taurus does provide us with some critical grounding. So people might have all sorts of ideas and concepts and plans. Some of them might be completely unrealistic, but with moon in Taurus, that does give us an opportunity to perhaps get back to basics, maybe before we plunge into any more craziness. Of course, the moon is not going to last for so long in Taurus. By late tomorrow, certainly by the midweek, the moon will be out of Taurus into Gemini. We'll have a load of air to talk about, and things might just get abstract, all over again. So the moon in Taurus, it makes a few squares. As it moves through the beginning of a sign, it makes a square to Pluto, square to the Sun, square to Mercury, square to Venus. So it squares all those Aquarius planets. And so with those squares, that might be about this question, yeah, you can have all these ideas. You can go sort of floating off into space, but where is it all going? Do you actually know what you're doing? I mean, that might be a thought. Plus, we have got a first quarter moon. So first quarter moon, moon is in Taurus, sun is in Aquarius. So, we had a new moon just over a week ago. That new moon at 28 degrees 44, 28 degrees 44 Capricorn. So we had that new moon, new lunar cycle. And, with the moon square sun, there is this first crisis. And that crisis is about, perhaps Aquarius, or of course, the original new moon was in Capricorn, but now that the new moon has kind of changed its face, has become more of an Aquarius new moon, as all these planets have moved, out of Capricorn, it just could be about our ideas and what is possible. It might indeed be about the mind-body split. And, yeah, we can have ideas, but the moon is saying, how are you going to do it? Is it actually going to be possible? And, right at the end of the day and into tomorrow, we have moon sextile Jupiter, moon in Taurus, sextile, Jupiter in Jupiter in Cancer. That's a relatively benign aspect. I think sort of quite fortunate, and it might just be that, by the end of the day, things are starting to get easier. Now, the main event of the day is, of course, Neptune moving into Aries. Now, does that mean we're going to feel Neptune moving into Aries straight away? Not necessarily. I mean, this is a long-term event. Neptune is going to be in Aries until the end of the 2030s. So a long time before Neptune moves into Taurus. I think we need Neptune to be in Taurus, to be honest. But it's a long time to wait. It really is. I think that Neptune in Taurus is going to be about the environment and people realizing how much damage has been done to the environment. But right now, it's all about Neptune in Aries. It's about just acting, people just doing what they want, perhaps. I think there are certainly reasons to worry about Neptune in Aries, but I'll be coming on to that a bit later. Another thing that we shouldn't forget is that Neptune is on the Aries point. It's not just Neptune moving into any sign. It's Neptune moving into the first sign, and it's on the Aries point. And the problem, well, there are a couple of problems with it. So if you think about the Aries point, well, it represents the collective. That's what the Aries point is about. It's about the world. It's the world point. So with Neptune on the Aries point, there is this uncertainty. But it's kind of worse than that, because the Aries point, if you look at the Aries point, you will notice that it's on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. I don't have to show you any dials or anything to illustrate this. There is Mars at 2 degrees Aquarius. There is Uranus at 27 degrees Taurus. And so you can see just by eye that the Aries point is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And so is Neptune. So you've got Aries and Neptune on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So I believe, let's just get it right, it is... we can say that Mars is on the contra anticium of Uranus. So Mars would be on the anticium of Uranus if it was reflected through the solstice points, which is Capricorn and Cancer. So Mars is on the contra anticium. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I've got the jargon right. So when it's reflected through the Aries point, and so that gives Mars and Uranus a lot of power. And over the next couple of days, I think that could represent some quite dramatic events of a Mars-Uranus nature. But I'll look at that later in the video when I go into detail about Mars and Neptune moving into Aries, because I think it's kind of all part of the same thing. It's perhaps one of the short-term manifestations of Neptune moving into Aries. So turning to the situation in Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, here's a chart for Australia and New Zealand. You can see that at midday on November the 26th, on January the 26th, moon is in Taurus already. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, then early in the day, this morning. Probably quite early in the morning, moon will move into Taurus. So I think it's, even if you're in New Zealand, I think that it is a moon in Taurus day. I think that if you are in Australia or New Zealand, those squares that I talked about, moon square Pluto, square Sun, square Mercury, square Venus, are much stronger, sort of more intense, and there might be more of a crisis of action than, say, if you're in Europe or the United States. And I think that first quarter moon is going to be more intense as well. This is the question is, here is the crisis. The new moon started just over a week ago. What are you going to do? And if you are in Australasia, that might be something that you do feel. And then there is the heliocentric picture. So heliocentrically, here is what the planets look like. So from putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and you can see that there is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus, an exact heliocentric conjunction between the two. And this conjunction is, I would have said, by and large, fairly fortunate. It perhaps hints at our creativity, and it's a time to be clearly very honest about what we can do. Now, some of us might not find this possible because this is a heliocentric aspect, and heliocentric aspects do take place at a higher level. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't, make the effort. I think we can make the effort, and if we can get in touch with something which might be sort of beyond our normal level of consciousness, that might be something to be sort of aspiring to. And also, there is a micro aspect going on. Pluto is 15 degrees from Mercury and Venus, so Pluto is making a semi-sextile to the Mercury-Venus conjunction, and so a semi-sextile, 15 degrees, can be about having something that we could be doing, and that we could be doing it well, and it may just be a natural outflow of our own creativity. But that 15-degree aspect of Pluto is kind of challenging us. How are we going to bring Pluto in? Creativity has many levels. Creativity, can be banal, to be honest. People overuse the word creativity. And if we're going to be creative, if we're going to be genuinely creative, we have to move things on. We have to take on board the transformative energy of the universe. It's there, we know it's there, but do we have what it takes to integrate it? I think we do have what it takes, but it may be something of a challenge. So now I want to look at today, Monday, January the 26th, 2026, from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, January 26, 2026. Those sixes are really annoying, difficult to get off the tongue. Aries, Neptune is moving into your sign, and it stays there. It doesn't retrograde out of Aries and back into Pisces anymore. It will stay in Aries until the late 2030s. So, with Neptune moving into Aries, how do you feel about it? On the face of it, it sounds difficult on the face of it. I mean, Neptune is a transpersonal planet. Some actually regard Neptune as a malefic. It causes a lot of problems. It causes uncertainty. It can be a mischief maker. Not in the mercurial way of being a mischief maker, but it can create, a lot of delusion, fantasy, and so that is one possibility of Neptune moving into Aries. On the other hand, Neptune moving into Aries could be a calling that you might not be consciously aware of. There may be just something you have to do. And an example of someone who had to deal with Neptune moving through his sun sign. Okay, I know you may be looking at these forecasts from the perspective of your ascendant or even your moon sign, but someone who had a sun in Aries who was impacted by this was Bismarck. So Otto von Bismarck was, of course, one of the most famous and renowned Germans who, when he as Chancellor of Germany, he was responsible for not just helping to sort of reunify his country. Sorry, my knowledge of German history isn't great, but I kind of know the basics. And so he reunified Germany. He created the German state. He created a welfare system and so forth, and he hit prominence as Neptune was moving through his sun sign. So perhaps you should have Otto von Bismarck as an example, and it was Germany's time, and that's what perhaps Neptune in Aries. You could say that Aries as a sign does have a connection with Germany. But I will be talking about later in the video. I mean, the point I'm trying to make of Otto von Bismarck is that you should, if you're an Aries, you should not be concerned necessarily about Neptune moving into your sign, because as Neptune moved into Aries, moved through Aries in the 1860s and early 1870s, he really hit peak form. So it is something powerful for you, and if you have a vocation, then go for it. Yeah, and maybe the universe is calling you. Now you can see how it might go wrong. If you get the wrong calling, you can have a false calling, and you might get distracted. But I think that if you are honest with yourself, then this whole period between now and the late 2030s can really be quite fortunate for you. And the key to being fortunate, the key to being lucky is to doing what is expected of you, not what is expected of you by your family or by peer pressure, what is expected of you by the universe. And that's what it's all about. And so if you can accept that, then I think that Neptune in Aries shouldn't be such a bad thing. And as far as how you respond to Neptune moving into Aries, what should be your first approach? I think your first approach, ideally, should be quite relaxed. I don't think you want to sort of jump to conclusions today. I think that you want to just be able to sort of drift into your ambitions. And when I say ambitions, I don't mean ambition in anything. In a material way, not really. I mean, I know the moon is in Taurus, but just consider its ambitions. Perhaps it's more about your vision. Sort of accept that vision, merge into that vision. There's nothing that has to be done right now, I don't think, but you do. But you just have to accept what is there. Accept that there is something you need to do, and really, Aries, on a fundamental level, that's probably all that needs to be done. Now, if I tried to be quite material about today, so come down to earth, well, the moon is in Taurus. If we want to bring it down to earth with moon in Taurus is making a square to the sun, and that can say something about your aspirations with this first quarter moon. Okay, the first quarter moon may have been exact on Sunday, may be exact today. I mean, probably more likely to be Sunday, but we still got a first quarter feel to moon in Taurus and sun in Aquarius. You have your ideas, you have your ambitions, you have things that you want to do, but moon in Taurus may be asking, well, how are you going to do it? Do you have the resources? Do you have the money? I mean, as crude as that. And if something is meant to be, it's meant to be. I mean, financial issues, whether or not you can afford it or not, well, you've got to do it. If it's your destiny to create a YouTube video, then you've got to get hold of a camera. You will find a way of getting a hold of a camera. If you can't get a hold of a camera, you can use the webcam on your computer. There's always a way, and there's no need necessarily to spend excessive amounts of money in order to achieve your ambitions or to achieve your goals. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be, and you will find a way of doing it. And really, it's meant to be. Some things are meant to be. And if you have a destiny with Neptune moving into Aries, don't look the other way. And there might be a sense in which there's something that you're just meant to be doing. Taurus. Moon is right in the middle of your sign, and it's making squares to the Aquarius planets. Okay, some of those squares might be more about yesterday. I mean, it depends on your time zone, but there is a square relationship between that moon in Taurus and those Aquarius planets, and I think that's probably quite a good thing, because being a Taurus, obviously you're an earth sign, and being an earth sign, that it is important every now and then to just bring things down to earth. You can have all the ideas in the world, but so what? If you can't get them together, they're going to come to nothing. And with the moon in Taurus, you know this. And that there are some things that have to be achieved, and they have to be achieved in the real world. And today, Monday, beginning of the working week, and so that may say something about your overall approach. Being very down to earth, being very focused on what you need to do, realizing now that 5 planets are in Aquarius. And 5 planets are going to stay in Aquarius. We're going to have these 5 planets in Aquarius until I think around February the 10th. So, over the next couple of weeks, Taurus, that there's a lot for you to get together, if you want to make the most of everything. And I think that these lunar squares are going to, hopefully, I think they're going to provide the impetus. And so now might be the start. Now remember, also, the moon is not going to stay in Taurus for too long. Okay, the moon will be in Taurus probably tomorrow, but after that, moon moves into Gemini. There's no planets in Earth signs for quite a long time. And so while there are planets in Earth signs, in particular while the moon is in Taurus today and tomorrow, it's time to get it together and create the foundations of something. Don't just think about it. Taurus, you have to actually start something. You have to, I don't like to use building metaphors, but, pouring concrete. I mean, pouring concrete is a bad thing to do, but I mean that in a symbolic way. You have to make your presence clear, that you are here, and it has to be tangible. I think making a tangible impression right now, Taurus, I think that is going to be very important. And sometimes if you want to make a tangible impression, you do have to get noticed, and you may have to get noticed in a way that short term isn't much fun. It may seem embarrassing, but you have to make an impression. Maybe it's not necessary to make an impression, but it depends exactly what you're trying to do. But I think Taurus, do think about it. You certainly don't keep things to yourself. Don't just imagine what you could be doing. You've really got to bring it down to earth, and I really think you can bring it down to earth. And towards the end of the day and into tomorrow, the moon makes a sextile to Jupiter, a sort of less stressful aspect from those squares. And so towards the end of the day, you have a chance to get things together, and your planning and your work may start to bear fruit. So it should not be a lazy day. There's definitely things that need to be done, and Taurus, I'm confident that you really can get it together. Gemini, there are certainly still a lot of planets in Aquarius. Just a reminder, 5 planets in Aquarius means that you are perhaps thinking about all the many possibilities in front of you. And there could be a lot of possibilities that you're becoming aware of. And it's almost like an ongoing process. You know, you think about one thing and then you think about another thing, and you're thinking about this possibility and that possibility. And the more you discover, the more you read, the more you listen, the more things become clear. I mean, so many things might become clear that you're not quite sure where it's all going on. Well, sorry, you're not quite sure where it's all going. And the moon in Taurus is aspecting these Aquarius planets. It's making a square aspect, and that moon in Taurus is to an extent quite hidden. It's not right there, but at some level, Gemini, you are sifting things through. You are making decisions. It's almost like consciously you're not making decisions, but unconsciously you are. You kind of just know instinctively that some things are going to work and some things are not going to work. And so you perhaps have to make some decisions. You have to decide, and possibly it might be a good time to listen to some of your feelings. Your feelings are telling you that something is right and something is wrong, and your feelings are actually interacting with the material world. If something is obvious, completely obvious, you might just see something, but you don't want to see it. You just look the other way. But sometimes it's as simple as that. The material world is telling you something, and you don't want to sort of mess around with that. If something is clear, that's the way it is. And there's no need to necessarily do anything. I think that, in fact, Gemini, you're going to be, most effective when you're doing things in a kind of indirect way. You don't want to be completely at the center of things. You don't want to be the one who is calling, all the shots. You don't want to be the one who is seen to be taking the initiative. I don't think that would necessarily work. Instead, it's time to be thinking about how you might go about things at maybe an almost sort of spiritual level, because you know that something is telling you something, and it's not clear enough for you to necessarily be taking definite actions, but your unconscious world is giving you loads and loads of signals, and you might be able to see the material world as well. So maybe the unconscious and the material are kind of going to be linked together. Now, one thing we do have today is Neptune moving out of Pisces and into Aries. So the way you might want to see that is not necessarily think about Neptune in Aries, but think about Neptune in Pisces. Neptune's been in Pisces on and off for a long time. And it doesn't matter how old you are. I've got my son in Gemini. I'm going to be 64 next birthday, but it's going to affect all of us. But when you look at that, at the past, and when you look at how Neptune in Pisces might have felt, it might have felt that you did have a lot of ideas. You had a lot of plans for the future. You perhaps had ambitions, and some of these ambitions might have been far-fetched, and maybe they worked, maybe they didn't. Maybe a lot of them didn't work, and there could be a feeling that at some level you kind of left it too late. Now that Neptune has moved out of Pisces and moving into Aries, and of course Saturn is about to move out of Pisces as well. So Saturn has still got a couple of weeks left in Pisces, and so now you have to kind of move move beyond the ambition, and we're talking about looking at an ambition in a different way. So the ambitions haven't gone, but the impetus has changed. So it might be, Gemini, that the impetus to do something was quite mundane. You were thinking about money and status and security and these kind of things. Now, as Neptune moves into Aries, well, it's changed. Now you're thinking about things in a more fundamental and existential way. And perhaps that is the lesson of Neptune moving into Aries. Is, it's going to be in Aries till the late 2030s. How old am I going to be? Well, I'm sorry, I'm not talking. I'm talking about just me, but just to get this in perspective. And so I'm 70 in 2032. So I'm going to be in my mid 70s by the time, if I get that far. Statistically, there's quite a good chance I don't get that far, but. All it doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're younger than me or older than me. You've still got to think about that period of time as Neptune moves into Aries, and you probably need to think about what the motivation is. It's much more deep. It's much more sincere, and it is more existential. It certainly goes beyond money and security. It's something that you have to do. It's just about it's about your hopes for the future, what you'd like to happen in the future, and also about doing what needs to be done in however much time you've got left. We're all on the clock, of course. Because some of you might go sort of beyond Neptune moving through Pisces, moving through Aries and moving through into Taurus and beyond. But I just think the structure of your ambitions and your hopes is going to change as Neptune moves into Aries, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's more sincere. It just goes beyond the material and is about what you're here for, and I think that is probably the best way of relating to Neptune and moving through Aries. And so there are definitely things to think about. I'm not saying that there's anything that you necessarily have to do today, but you just have to be aware that a big change has happened. And if there is anything to do, I think you need to concentrate on Saturn. Saturn is going to be in Pisces for not much longer, just 3 weeks less, 26, 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks left of Saturn in Pisces. That's the time to really wrap certain things up, to make sure that some of your ambitions of the future, they're on a firm ground, and you're ready to change gear, to move away from just focusing on rewards, material rewards, and to be thinking about something much wider, connected with your broader destiny. Cancer. Neptune is moving into Aries, and naturally this is an important event. I mean, I think it's important for everyone, but for you it's important because if you think about it, Aries is a cardinal sign. Cancer is a cardinal sign. And so with Neptune moving into Aries, and it stays in Aries, remember, until the 2030s, late 2030s. And so this does say something about your direction and how you perceive your direction. And don't forget that in the Cancerian horoscope, Pisces is a high profile sign, and it's it's often related to to one's career, one's work, where you think you're going. And with Neptune moving through Aries, you're going to be challenged to think about things in a new way. You might at the moment have clear ideas about what it's all about, where it's all going, and that might be straightforward. But as Neptune moves into Aries, it sort of washes things away, but in a way that is fortunate. You start to sort of undermine old structures, perhaps structures that have just got a bit tired. They've been around for some time, but they're just exhausted. And Neptune moving into Aries makes you see things sort of in perhaps a different way. And so, yeah, it's true at the moment that you are in a position where you have strong ambitions, and your ambitions are going to, in many respects, going to get stronger. Remember, Saturn is about to move into Aries, but you have to be at the same time more flexible. It's not just about having one single goal which you will not compromise. This is it. This is what it's about. This is what you want to achieve. You can perhaps define it in quite a sort of material way. I will achieve this by this date. Well, Neptune moving into Pisces doesn't want that. It's about being less precise and, in a way, more ambitious. Ambitions which just go beyond the material and which perhaps are also sort of aspirational and might relate to the wider good. I mean, Neptune, after all, is a collective planet. And so being a collective planet, it's what you can do for everyone. It's not just about you. So these are the kind of questions that you may be having to ask yourself. And one reason that it might become particularly pressing is the reaction of other people. I mean, certainly at the beginning of a week, there might be people to engage with, and your connections with other people today may not always be great. You might not be too happy about what you hear. You may hear things which are rather conflicting, and you'd rather not hear them, but they should be motivating. And it perhaps occurs to you that some things have been kept to yourself too much, and you've been rather too sure of yourself. And by looking at other people's response to you, and also just the way other people present themselves, because when you're looking at a human being, there's always that question, well, what could you be doing for them? What could you be doing to make the world a better place? And that might link back to your structure, whole structure of your ambitions, because going back to Neptune in Aries, this might be a time where you are sort of more how shall I put it, more in tune with some kind of collective obligation, that you want to do something that is useful not just for yourself, but for humanity as well. So Neptune in Aries might inject some idealism into the structure of your ambitions. But I'm sorry, Cancer, to be rather abstract. I mean, at the end of the day, the moon does make a sextile to Jupiter. The moon sextile Jupiter, by the way, that is a great aspect. As the day progresses, that aspect gets stronger. As you know, you've got Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is in your sign. Jupiter's exalted in Cancer. Moon making a sextile to Jupiter makes you lucky, allows you to make the most of other people, not necessarily in an exploitative way, but you can benefit from other people's company, and through other people you can get a clear sense of what you're supposed to be doing. And that's a theme for many people today, not just you. I know I don't want to make everyone the same, but there is this feeling of, for many people, what's it all about? Where are we supposed to be going? And I think for you specifically, Cancer, with that moon sextile Jupiter, at the end of the day and into tomorrow, you just can just have a feeling that, yeah, you can be on the right path, and the path is in front of you. The path has been created for you, and so now it's just a question of taking that first step. Leo, you've got a lot to say for yourself, I think, right now. After all, the sun is your ruler. The sun is, it's conjunct Mercury. It's conjunct Mars. Well, to be more specific, the sun is conjunct the Mercury-Mars midpoint. You can see this. You can see this aspect if you look at the chart. You can see that. There's the sun in Aquarius, and on one side of the sun is Mercury. On one side of the sun is Mars, the other side is Venus. Sun is right in the middle, right on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And so, that means that you can be very fluent. And if something is bothering you, I don't think you'll have any difficulties expressing yourself. The words just naturally flow. Now, does that mean that they have to flow, that they should be flowing? Well, not necessarily. You don't always have to say something. If something bothers you, you don't have to tell everyone about it. You don't have to cause a fight where none is necessary. And there is the other side of it, is that if you were to say nothing, you've got to get the balance right. You've got something to say. You've got feelings to express, but if you say nothing and if you just keep quiet, then the thing you should have been doing yourself could be imposed upon you, and it indeed could be projected. So that sun, your sun is the sun is in Aquarius. The sun is in your opposite sign. So with the sun in Aquarius, that might indicate, Leo, that you might see aspects of yourself in other people. So if you find that other people are talking a lot, arguing a lot, being very dynamic and decisive, that might just be a reminder that you're not being dynamic and decisive enough. So perhaps you can look at what other people are doing, and that might be telling you something about what you should be doing. And perhaps that just means that you need to take more ownership. And that is an issue, I think, that with all those planets in Aquarius. It's good that we've got all these planets in Aquarius, because it kind of reminds you that you're not the only person on the planet, that there are other people to consider. But it might become too much of a good thing. Now, while all this is going on, we have a first quarter moon. This first quarter moon could have been Friday, could have been the end of the weekend, could have been today, Monday. So that means that we've got the moon square the sun, and that moon square sun is reminding you that, hold on, there was a new moon a week ago, over a week ago, and what are you doing? What are you doing about it? All of us should, as far as possible, try to make the most of whatever's going on astrologically, and we should make the most of the lunar cycle. And that new moon at 2844 Capricorn was a new beginning for you, and so the question is, it's a new beginning for everyone, but what are you doing about it? And I think now, if you're honest with yourself, you'll realize that something does actually need to be done, that there's perhaps something you need to do that's quite material. We now at least we have the moon in an Earth sign, and so with that moon in Taurus, there's something you need to project. When I say project, you need to project your power and personality onto the outside world and get results. And you can do that. You can be very effective. And you might be telling yourself, well, there's outside resistance. What are other people going to say? And if you get resistance, you might decide to just, give up and just, call it a day. And that's I don't think a good approach. I think that you need to accept that you can't agree with everyone. not everyone is going to like what you're doing, what you're planning on doing, but yes, there are things that you need to get together on. And I think that with that moon square sun is perhaps about accepting other people, accepting that other people, particularly if you're having to interact with them at work, they're there, but they can't stop you. In the end, if something is important, then you need to give it everything. And I think that once you realize that, I think that you will be able to make good progress, and I think you may be able to take other people with you. So other people, you might think that it's difficult, impossible to get them to change their mind, difficult to persuade them, but I do actually think that it might be possible. If you use the right approach, if you use the right words. And also we've got Moon making a sextile to Jupiter, and Moon sextile Jupiter is telling you that you don't have to do everything in public. You can do things which are very important for you, maybe very important for your ambitions. You can do them, and you can do them very well, and no one needs to know about it, at least in the short term. One final thing about Neptune moving into Aries. Neptune's moving into a fire sign. It stays in a fire sign. It stays in Aries until the late 2030s. And during this time, on and off, Leo, there's going to be a lot of toing and froing about your beliefs. What do you believe in? When I say belief, that might be your political beliefs. It might be your religious and spiritual beliefs. And I think that in a broad sense, you've got to try to be open-minded. Now, being a Leo, you're a fixed sign. You may be very sure about what you believe in. But, over the next 10 years and more, some of those beliefs might be undermined. You might see something that just doesn't fit. And if it doesn't fit, then you've got to change. And so it might be that in I don't know, by the 2030s, late 2030s, what you believe in, what is important to you spiritually and socially, may not be quite what it is now. I mean, that's just a note for the future. I don't think you have to, worry about it too much. Virgo. Neptune is moving out of Pisces, well, for good. Neptune won't be back in Pisces for a very long time. None of us here are going to be alive when Neptune moves back into Pisces. And so, with Neptune in Pisces, moving out of Pisces, it's perhaps a good time to reflect on how you've managed things, how you've managed, for example, your relations with other people. How have things been? Have things been straightforward? Have you been perhaps deceived by other people? And what mistakes have you made? And now that Neptune is moving into Aries, it's a chance perhaps to be more reflective and perhaps a little more guarded. Now you've seen the mistakes you have made or could make regarding other people. I think that you're going to feel that you have to change your approach to an extent, and perhaps be more self-contained. So that's certainly a way of looking at Neptune in Aries. At the same time, you don't want to make Neptune in Aries more confusing than it has to be. I think that one of the pressures that you might have to deal with, over the next few years, don't forget Neptune. It's not just Neptune moving into Aries. We've soon got Saturn moving into Aries as well. Is that there might be issues, for example, where you're looking at legal small print, agreements, documentation, legacies, all of that kind of stuff, complicated money. With Neptune moving into Aries, it just could become more complicated. And there's a danger with Neptune in Aries, but there may be times when you are deceived by the small print. You're a Virgo, you're looking at things as they seem to be on the surface, but there might be stuff going on that really is really heavy, really complicated, and it kind of passes you by, and you could sort of end up being deceived. And so, as a sort of general lesson for the next, I don't know, 15 years or whatever it is, 13 years, whatever it is that however long Neptune stays in Aries, is to, always read the small print. Just read everything. Don't just skip over anything, and use your intuition. If you feel that there's something lying in the small print that needs to be explored, then explore it, and don't assume you know it, and don't listen to other people or even if they claim to know what they're talking about, even if they're lawyers. Don't just listen to someone saying, oh well, it's all been sorted out, the legal side of things has been sorted out, it's all going to be fine, don't worry about it. No, you always worry about it, and get into the minutiae of the agreement, any agreement you might be signed up to, whatever it is. Whether you're, I don't know, hiring a car, you're making a will, getting into some kind of complex financial agreement, just don't be overwhelmed by it, and really make the effort to understand, what's going on. So that's the broad picture with Neptune moving into Aries. We also have a situation where Mercury is pretty close to Venus. So Mercury is, you can see that it's almost there. It's almost making the conjunction. Heliocentrically, we've got an exact conjunction between Mercury and Venus. So that's quite a pleasant influence. Over the next few days, I think that you have the ability to relate very well. But if you are going to relate, it's important that it's done in a way which is, is organized. I don't think you want to get too emotional at the moment, in general. There's a time for emotion, but I don't think now is the time for emotion. I think that you have to be very logical about everything. So if you can deal with people in a logical, upfront way, I think that's going to be fine, and I think that you're going to benefit from a sextile between Moon and Jupiter. So Moon sextile Jupiter says something about relationships. It may be that you find a new way of being in terms of an existing relationship, a way that is kind of more satisfying and is perhaps more life enhancing. But again, you don't want to make things too complicated, and the same applies for just people you don't know quite so well. If you just deal with things in an honest and sincere way, without getting emotional, then I think that things should work pretty well. As soon as things get emotional, it's not what you need, it's not what you want, and so overall, I think that it needn't be a bad day, and you can certainly have thoughts about the wider world. You don't have to sort of look down and be just obsessed about small things. You can see the overall connectedness of everything, and perhaps all of us can. Neptune moving into Aries, moving on to the Aries point, does give us, all of us, a new perspective. But as far as you're concerned, Virgo, it really is quite special. You can go beyond the material, and the material in a sort of superficial sense. I mean, because when you think about the material, you think about the material world of money and small detail and all that kind of thing. But there's a material world in another sense. It is about the earth and the sanctity of the earth. And I think, Virgo, at the moment you can get a vision of that, and so that might say something about how you start the new week. You're thinking about what can be done, what can be achieved, and also about your ideals. And so it's not enough just to be able to sort of hack out the facts of a matter. You have to look at the sort of the underlying material morality, and I think that that is something you can do today. Libra. Neptune is moving into Aries. I mean, Neptune was in Aries sort of last year, but it didn't stay that long. But now it is here, and so the question is, what does that mean for you? Well, Neptune is in your opposite sign, and of course it stays in your opposite sign now for a long time, until the sort of late 2030s. And so while Neptune is moving through Aries, that might be a time where you need to think about what's happening out there. It's not about you, you might say. I mean, Aries in the Libran chart, it represents other people, relationships, but everything that is not you, but is beyond your immediate boundaries. And with Neptune moving through Aries, there may be times where it feels really rather confusing. You can't make sense of it, and you might make mistakes, or you might think you're making mistakes, and trying to work out what other people are doing. It could be hard work, and as far as relationships are concerned, it is possible that you allow yourself to be deceived, and you take something someone says at face value, particularly if they're presenting something that you find attractive. Remember, Aries is your opposite sign, and so in certain cases, if another person is being dynamic, is being quite sort of Aryan, there might be an appeal there. So someone makes a suggestion and you think, oh, that sounds a good idea, that sounds fun, that sounds exciting, at least we're moving. So movement might seem to be an aim in itself. So what does that all mean from a psychological perspective? Well, you might say that Aries and Libra are part of a polarity, and so Aries might be a principle that you're not particularly aware of, but it is an essential part of who you are, sort of an unconscious part. And so at some level, Libra, you want to take the initiative, you want to be dynamic, and many Librans can be dynamic. There are a lot of successful Libran politicians around, Margaret Thatcher, for example, or Vladimir Putin. But so Librans can be very effective in politics, and they can push forward with an agenda, but just some Librans find it difficult. And if you don't have an opinion, if you are not taking the initiative, that means that you're allowing someone else to take the lead. And so perhaps with Neptune moving into Aries, this is an important lesson for you. It's about looking at how you could be deceived, but at the same time recognizing that there is a way forward, and the way forward is to really take ownership of something. And you can take ownership of who you are and what is important to you. And as far as today, Monday, is concerned, well, it might be a good time for a demonstration, just to prove something to yourself. So, for example, Libra, you might do something or say something that is dynamic. You don't have to say it, you don't have to do it, but it just might be a good opportunity to demonstrate to yourself that what can be done. If you make the effort, and in general, a fairly intense approach today, Libra, might actually be the best approach. Take yourself seriously, and if you can do that, then I think that other people will take you seriously as well. So I think that things can work well for you, not just today, but over the next 10 years and more. But I think it's just important that you make a special effort to be aware. Scorpio, I think a bit of detachment might be quite a good idea today. It's easy to take things seriously, particularly if you're a Scorpio. There might be things which seem really important, almost perhaps a matter of life and death. But really, how important are they? I mean, they might be important, but are they important like today? Do you really need to get worried about them, worked up about them? No, I don't think so. And at the same time, you can still understand that some things are more important than others. You can be developing a broad vision about where you want to go, how you want to go about it. You can have strong opinions, whether they be political opinions, moral opinions, spiritual opinions. You can have all of that, but you don't have to get worked up about it. In fact, if an opinion is worth holding at the moment, this isn't always the case, but if an opinion is worth holding, it's probably not worth getting angry about. It's just something that is just an essential part of you, and it doesn't have to be fought over. You don't have to get outraged about it. You just have to accept it, and also accept other people's difference, other people's differences of opinion. If something outrages you, or if someone says something that outrages you, well, then that might be an issue. And particularly if you're talking about an approach, one approach, which approach you go for? Do you go for this approach, that approach? Differences of opinion should certainly be tolerated, and really nothing is worth getting excited about, or certainly not worth arguing about. And so that's I think an important aspect of today. And don't forget, with all of these planets in Aquarius, 5 planets in Aquarius, you don't have to make a big effort to be seen and heard. You don't have to raise your voice, and perhaps you can just allow things to just unfold in their own natural way. Yeah, there will, I think, be times when you do experience a bit of irritation. I mean, after all, the moon is making moon in Taurus is making square aspects to some of those Aquarius planets. Those Aquarius planets, they represent perhaps you, what is important to you. Then the moon in Taurus can represent perhaps an outside entity, an irritation, something you don't really want to bother with, someone trying to attract your attention. Is a red flag to a Scorpio? You have the temptation to get annoyed, but I think you have to look the other way and let the temptation pass. And I think that really is very much the right approach. And one thing we do have today is Neptune moving into Aries. Neptune moving into Aries is going to stay there a long time. And, the question is, can we really talk about Neptune moving into Aries in a personal way? I mean, it's always an issue with astrology. We know what are the personal planets, and, what is personal to you and what is just something, very collective. Obviously everyone who's a Scorpio will have this Neptune moving through Aries, and it will manifest, in different ways. And it might be a good idea with Neptune moving through Aries to pay some attention to your health, to think about what can influence your health. Because Neptune in Aries talks about influences which might not be immediately obvious. Sure, that what you eat can influence your health, how much exercise you take. If you expose yourself to poisons and other pollutants, but maybe there are other things like making sure that you're in the right environment, in the right atmosphere, and perhaps health-wise, you need to look beyond what is obvious, and perhaps, things like, I don't know, atmospheric pressure. I mean, there are people who think that it's really important to think about what the pressure is, but if there's high pressure, you can get headaches, and other things. I'm not a great expert on barometric pressure and health, but certainly there are parts of the world where it's considered to be very important, for example, in Central Europe. So that's something you might want to think about. All the things that could influence your well-being, which aren't necessarily, completely obvious. They might just seem like a superstition, but they might not be a superstition. So, as far as health and well-being is concerned, I think that's how you might be influenced by Neptune moving through Aries. Now, on a different level, if you are an owner of a what do they call them? A pet, or are they a companion animal? I know some people think that pet is the wrong way to look at them, but but Neptune moving into Aries may well say something about animals and your relationship to animals, because Aries, from a Scorpio perspective, it's the sixth sign. It's like the sixth house in astrology. Sixth house is connected with animals, smaller animals which are sort of smaller than a goat. So we're not talking about whales or horses or cows. We're talking primary dogs, cats, guinea pigs, goldfish, whatever. And with Neptune in Aries, that might say something about how you communicate with animals, your perspective on animals, and perhaps your compassion towards animals and maybe nature in general. But I think more about specifically animals. So if an animal is suffering or is trying to communicate to you, then I think you're going to be able to sort of pick up that communication, pretty well. So, yeah, if you are a Scorpio who has companion animals or pets, or however you want to describe them, then I think your relationship to them, might change over the next 10 years and more, and you might just find yourself becoming more sensitive to animals than usual, and being more sensitive to their emotions. That's a kind of the surprising thing about being a dog owner. I'm not really a natural dog person, but when you realize how emotional a dog is, but then you think about it, animals are emotional. Even a spider is emotional. The spider, fear is an emotion, protectiveness is an emotion. And I think that in general, Scorpio, you are going to have a good understanding of the animal kingdom, and particularly those animals which are close by. Sagittarius. I have to talk about Neptune moving into Aries. I mean, Neptune moving into Aries is going to affect everyone, but it's going to affect different people in different ways. So as far as you're concerned, Neptune moving into Aries, well, that's Neptune moving into a fire sign. You're feeling that something has changed, and probably changed in quite a good way, because now that Neptune's out of Pisces, maybe you can be slightly more relaxed, because if you go back to Neptune being in Pisces, it's a long time ago that Neptune went into Pisces. But when Neptune did go into Pisces, was when Neptune has been going through Pisces over the last 10 years and more. There may have been times, Sagittarius, where you didn't feel always entirely sure of yourself, especially in terms of your home. Where do you live? Your domestic environment, your family. There was always a bit of uncertainty, not quite knowing what was going on, and it was easy to sort of perhaps to reach the wrong conclusions. And so it was hard work, and you thought you were going in one direction, you thought everything was clear, then something happens at home, perhaps something happens with your family, there's some new pressure. So that might have been how you experienced Neptune in Pisces. But now Neptune is moving into Aries. perhaps that stage of your life is over, and Neptune moving into Aries is perhaps easier, and it might say something about how you express yourself. There are perhaps new ways of expressing yourself. I mean, with Neptune, it could be about art and doing things which are quite sort of subtle and ethereal, and so if you are able to do something of any artistic value, your imagination and your fantasies can really be brought out, and perhaps you can create things which really are of a sort of a high quality. And at the same time, with Neptune Aries, you might sort of discover or rediscover some of your Sagittarian playfulness. I mean, Sagittarius is a playful sign, and with Neptune in Aries, it just give you an idea about what it means to be able to just let go and be yourself, and also perhaps to be aware of not just how you can be creative, but also how you're supposed to be creative. What do we mean by supposed to be creative? You're not supposed to be doing anything. Well, that relates to kind of what you were born with, the talents you were born with. And maybe now with Neptune in Aries, you're going to be able to tune into them, in quite a sort of a long-term way. And so it's not just about doing something today, when Neptune moves into Aries. It's, you do need to think ahead, think about, what does this say about this whole time period ahead of you between now and the late 2030s. I think that you can achieve a great deal, and you can really show the flexibility and open-mindedness of your sign. So I think that that does look good. So, but I'm looking at things from a sort of quite a long-term basis. On a shorter-term basis, as far as like today is concerned, I think that today, part of you kind of wants to be alone. You're not necessarily going to enjoy other people's company. I mean, you may take the view that there are better things to be doing, and in fact, I think that when you're on your own, I think that you're going to be able to do some really good work, and I think you're going to enjoy being alone, and you'll also know that if you are in other people's company, things can happen. You might get confused, and you don't want to get confused, or you might do something you don't really want to do, but you kind of feel a sense of obligation. So that can be a problem. So I think overall, Sagittarius, I think that I think it's great that Neptune is moving out of Pisces into Aries, and so that is a very sort of long-term move. But on a shorter term, if we just think about today, Monday, then do what you feel you need to do, and quite possibly the less contact you have with other people, the better. Capricorn. I'm talking a lot about Neptune in Aries. Now, Neptune is moving into a cardinal sign, and you are a cardinal sign. So, with Neptune moving into Aries, that really can affect you. And, it is Neptune. It's not a personal planet. It's not a social planet. It's quite a collective energy. So the question would then be, does it need to affect you? I would have said probably not. I mean, think about it. Neptune was discovered in the middle of the 19th century. How did people lead their lives before Neptune was discovered? How did people look at their charts before Neptune was discovered? Well, they did. I mean, I know people looked at each other's horoscopes in a very different way than they do now, but Neptune was not part of the system. Indeed, Uranus wasn't part of the system until the end of the 18th century. So there's no absolute need to worry about Neptune in Aries. Although it could be argued that now that Neptune has been discovered, well, it's going to start to manifest, and it could be starting to manifest. So the question is, what might it mean if Neptune is in Aries? Well, It might say something about your home, where you live, your family, your immediate environment. So if you have been living in a particular place for a long time, with Neptune moving into Aries, you might be looking at things in a different way. You might find that something needs to change in your home, and you might suddenly find that your home is kind of more confusing than you thought it was. And that's a problem about houses, isn't it? Houses can do things. Houses can they can suddenly go wrong. You can get damp. I mean, if I were to look at Neptune in Aries in the most catastrophic way, I could say, well, Neptune in Aries means that for Capricorns, they're going to suddenly be aware of damp issues in their houses for the next 13 years. Now that, whatever it is, 13 years or however long Neptune stays in Pisces. Now that is an extreme interpretation, and it's an over-the-top interpretation. And I'm certainly not trying to scare you, but it could be that if you're involved in anything to do with real estate, not just now, but between now and the 2030s, pay extra attention. Whether you're buying, you're renting, whatever, pay extra attention, because it just might be a time when Capricorns just miss something, and if you do notice something, well, that gives you an opportunity maybe to get the price down or whatever. So nothing is quite as it seems, and it applies not just to your home, but we can go deeper than that. By the way, I'm absolutely not trying to frighten you. You have to remember that 1 in 12 people, all things being equal, are Capricorns. It cannot possibly be the case that every single Capricorn has the same issue. But another way of looking at it is that Aries for you is a sign that represents the depths of things. It represents the past, and it could be a time when Capricorns are thinking about the past, and where do they belong? This is happening a lot. For example, in America, I mean, people say that they're worried about Trump, or what some people say they're worried about Trump. A lot of people think Trump's great, but some people think, well, why do I want to live in America? Of course, America is a nation of immigrants, and a lot of people in America are sort of thinking about where they've come from and can they resuscitate an old family tie to get a citizenship. And that's something I've noticed a lot. A lot of Americans right now are trying to get second passports or exploring. It's not just about knowing who your ancestors were. And what does that reflect, and how is that going to work as Neptune moves into Aries? Regardless of whether or not you're able to get a second passport, regardless of whether you're American or not, you might be thinking about your past and what it means to be where you are. What does it mean? What is belonging? You might have lived in your house or your city for 20 years, but you might suddenly realize you don't belong, and so at worst, maybe it's a good thing. It could be about alienation. So if you're feeling alienation, you're feeling sort of alienated from your environment, that could be a way Neptune in Aries feels. And if you're feeling alienated, it might be a good thing, because it encourages you to do something else. It encourages you to look for roots. Maybe you've lost touch with your roots, and maybe that is one of the experiences of Neptune being in Aries. And it sounds potentially bad, but I think actually it's quite a good thing. And of course, if you're going deep into things, which you might want to, you might discover all sorts of things. You might discover things which might be disturbing. What people did in the past, because the past is important, I think, with Neptune moving into Aries. But so that's a kind of a broader trend. It's something changing, which is saying something about the next 13 years. As far as or whatever it is, late sometime, I mean, when late 2030s, when Neptune moves into Taurus. But, short term, I mean, today, Moon's in Taurus. Moon is exalted in Taurus. It's applying to a sextile of Jupiter. That's a nice aspect. And regardless of these potentially heavy issues, I think that you're feeling relatively good about yourself. If you do what's important to you, if you do the things you enjoy, you're going to feel happy. And I think that at the same time, with Moon sextile Jupiter, you can find the right kind of company. I think you can find people or at least someone to share whatever it is that you enjoy. So you needn't spend the day alone. And as you move into the last part of the day and into tomorrow, I think that sextile between Moon and Jupiter, gives you luck. And I think it also means that you can enjoy yourself, and you can enjoy yourself perhaps in another person's company as well. So it's not bad, but I'm just trying to get you to think about the longer term and what this Neptune and Aries might mean. But it might not mean anything. As I said at the beginning, Neptune is a transpersonal planet, and it just doesn't always affect us. Aquarius. Well, we still have a load of planets in Aquarius, but now the Moon is making a square aspect to these Aquarius planets. So we've got Moon in Taurus making square to Pluto, square to Sun, square to Mercury, square to Venus, and that Moon square Sun. That tells us that it's a first quarter Moon. We had the new Moon in late Capricorn. The Sun went into Aquarius. Now the Moon is in Taurus, and so that Moon may represent something that you haven't necessarily considered, but perhaps you should have considered. And with all these planets in Aquarius, you're ready to you're ready to move forward. You're ready to be dynamic, and you're ready to project yourself, perhaps on your terms, and perhaps fundamentally you'd like to do everything on your terms. Especially now that Mars is in Aquarius. Mars is in your sign. It's moving towards a conjunction of Pluto. It's on your terms. But then the Moon raises an issue, and the Moon raises the issue it's saying, well, you can do what you like, but what is the consequence? What might you be destroying? Things are perhaps more fragile than you realize, and you have to take into consideration other people, perhaps people you care about, your family. You might have to take into consideration your home. And so if you do what you want, exactly what you want, you might find that you're causing a fair amount of disruption. Maybe more than that. Maybe you're causing destruction as well. And so with those lunar aspects, and particularly the fact that it's a first quarter Moon, you've got to make sure that your actions are in accord with your own and other people's fundamental need for security. And it's not going to be so difficult. You just have to show a little bit of empathy and understanding, and then I think that you will be able to deal with things in an effective way. So I mean, it's about maturity, perhaps. Then we've got Neptune moving into Aries, and with Neptune moving into Aries, it's such a long-lasting thing, lasting until the 2030s, and so how is that gonna impact you? Now, Neptune, you could argue, is quite a malefic influence. There is a view that Neptune is a malefic. Neptune can cause a lot of trouble. It's quite a deceptive influence. Neptune moving into Aries, as far as you're concerned, are you a driver? Are you, if you're a driver, do think about your relationship with your car, and how you approach it, and how you go about buying new cars, or buying a second-hand car, or however you buy your cars. you have to be very focused on the whole issue of cars right now. Again, if you're a car owner, your choices about buying new cars could just be wrong. You might just not be aware of what's wrong with the car. Even if you buy a brand new car, something might be wrong with it. So your whole approach to cars needs to be very sort of realistic and down to earth, and you need to make sure that you're properly covered, and that there's always a way to get your money back. And if you have a car, it's got to be very well maintained. You've got to make an extra effort to look after your car. When you think about Neptune, you think about fluids, don't you? I don't know, brake fluid, water, all of these kind of things, water seeping in, and so do think about the vulnerabilities of the car. I mean, even if it's an old car, sort of I've got this sort of old Volvo. It hasn't been moving for some time, but it's that particular Volvo, that particular brand. There's a Volvo sedan, and there's a certain way in which water can leak into this car, and it was that design made in that particular year, and so it's that kind of thing. So be aware of water and how water fluids and how they can cause a problem. And of course, they always say that you've got to check that you've got enough water in the car before you go driving. Okay, I'm sorry to go on about cars. I'm just saying that's one dimension of Neptune moving into Aries. It's not just about cars. It may be about the whole way in which you travel, short-term, regular traveling, over the next decade and more, just may be an issue. How you get from A to B, how, for example, the bus or the train service works. I mean, everyone is complaining about buses and trains, and there's always a problem. But it may be for you, disruptions in bus and train travel could be more distressing than usual, or it may just be increase in traffic. Traffic is increasing in parts of the US. There isn't a proper public transport system, not a functioning public transport system. I mean, it's not just the US. I think people are complaining about the UK, and so it's nothing specific to the US. But transport is important, and so do think about transport, and perhaps you may have to make changes to your life based on transport. And so I know it's pretty mundane, but it's certainly a way in which Neptune in Aries can work if you're an Aquarius. Pisces. Neptune is moving out of your sign. Finally, it's gone. Are you sad about that? I don't think it's so bad for Neptune to be out of Pisces. I mean, I don't know what the last 10 years and more have been like for you, but I'm assuming that you've seen a lot of stuff which you normally wouldn't be aware of, and I think that you've perhaps become a lot more sensitive and perceptive with Neptune moving through Pisces. And sometimes you've perhaps been oversensitive. Perhaps you've seen too much. Yeah, it is sometimes possible to see too much, to feel too much, and so that's something that you've perhaps had to cope with. But now that Neptune is moving into Aries, well, with Neptune in Aries, the obvious thing to think about is money, and it's saying that over the next 10 years and more, you have to be extra precise with money, because you could say that Neptune in Aries could be about, for example, taking financial initiatives without necessarily thinking it all through. Perhaps making mistakes, reaching the wrong conclusions, and so do bear that in mind. With money, it's not as easy as it seems, and it's possible to do something dramatic, which seems to be the sensible thing at the time, but it may be based on a false premise. So, yeah. So I would really suggest that you think about that. I mean, I don't want to panic you. I mean, and there is a positive side to it. You have Neptune in Aries. You might become aware of financial opportunities which are somewhat unusual, and you just sense it. You just sense where the money is, and you sense that perhaps you could do something which could in the end turn out to be profitable. In fact, could be profitable very quickly. So, listen to your feelings regarding money, but be careful about being too impulsive. Now, as far as today is concerned, on the face of it, it seems that there is a lot to say. There's a lot to communicate. If you want, there are people to talk to. But the question is, do you really want to talk to people? I mean, we've got a first quarter moon, and we've got the moon making squares to the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and so the whole process of conversing, messaging, just may be more difficult than expected, and things might be just slower, and there could be disagreements. So maybe you should, keep some of your thoughts to yourself, and don't say more than you have to, because if you do say more than you have to, then it might not work out. But I think overall, as the day progresses, as you move into Tuesday, things should get better. This is because the moon is in Taurus. It makes those squares to the Aquarius planets, then it moves on. It makes a sextile to Jupiter, and I think that sextile to Jupiter could work very well for you. And it just could be that in your own way, you can do things that you enjoy, and at the same time, you may eventually find the right people to talk to, and that could be the real issue. That there's perhaps lots of people to talk to, lots of people to communicate with, but most of them are just not on your wavelength. But if you wait for long enough, you might find the right support and the right company. So perhaps just today takes a long time to get going, and it's really not until the end of the day, until sort of Monday turns to Tuesday, that things really start to click together. And that's it. That's all I've got to say about the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 60, which is limitation. We can't do everything all at once, all the time. Sometimes we've got to understand our limits, and therefore we should try to just focus today on what is important. And we do not want to exaggerate. Not a time for exaggeration at all. So just take it slowly, but don't beat yourself up about it all. Don't think that you've got to really hurt yourself, deny yourself things, in a way that really is painful. That's not what it's about. And it's about limiting yourself in a way that just is actually quite natural. There's no pain. It doesn't hurt. You just bring things together very easily, and excessive behavior is just naturally sort of slowed down, and you're feeling quite good in the end. So it's actually not a bad day, and you're feeling happy with your decisions, and you're not craving any pleasures that you've been denying yourself. And then we've got a moving line. You've got the fourth line moving, and with the fourth line moving, that moves to hexagram number 58, which is the joyous. The joyous certainly talks about pleasure. So by streamlining everything and making sure that nothing is exaggerated, you're feeling good about yourself, you're feeling happy, and you're feeling quite self-disciplined and self-contained. And that may be, where the joy is. And I think it's important not to get caught up in what other people are doing. The joyous, it can. I mean, part of the problem of the joyous, it is water over water. See, we've got the lake over the lake. So, one just goes with the flow. And if people are doing something, you just follow, and then you might kind of lose touch with where you're going. And don't forget, Neptune is on the Aries point at the moment. So yeah, there is that temptation to get confused and to just go with the flow. But I think looking at the previous hexagram limitation, I think about self-control. So self-control is just something that happens very naturally, and it's something that is reflected in your whole aura. And so I think that you can have an enjoyable day, but also quite a disciplined day, and I think you're going to be quite self-contained. And finally, I want to look at Neptune moving into Aries. And Neptune moving into Aries, I don't know. I've got sort of my views on this. I'm going to try not to be too controversial. So if we're looking at Neptune in Aries, there is this question: do we look at Neptune or do we look at Aries? I mean, what does it mean for Neptune to be in Aries? So one way of looking at Neptune moving into Aries might be to say, well, Neptune is this wonderful transcendent planet. It's all about spirituality. It's all about merging into something, beyond ourselves. It's about compassion, and it moves into Aries, and so it very much becomes part of everyone's self-expression, and it's a wonderful world that we're living in. I mean, that's a way of looking at Neptune in Aries. But there is another way of looking at Neptune in Aries, and rather than thinking too hard about the symbolism of Neptune, instead regard Neptune as, here's a chart for Neptune moving into Aries, a precise chart. Regard Neptune as just a pointer. That's all it is. Forget its meaning. Forget the fact that it, forget any ideas that Neptune is the god of the sea, or Neptune represents spirituality or confusion or anything like that. Just see it as a pointer. And so Neptune's in Pisces. That says something about the society in which we're living, the world in which we're living. Neptune moves into Aries, society changes. The Aries principle starts to become stronger. And certainly if you think about Neptune in Pisces, I think we've seen a load of Pisces, haven't we? We have seen Pisces. Pisces is about compassion. We have seen people getting really upset about things like, for example, we've seen protests, for example, about Gaza. The compassion a lot of people have felt about the victims of the Israeli bombing and so forth, and it's really focused on those victims and these images. So Pisces can be very much influenced by, imageries of bombed out families, people suffering. It can also be quite moralistic. Don't forget, Jupiter rules Neptune. It is absolutely, wrong for you to suggest that, that there's any other narrative. And, I don't know if you've had experience of this, but, for example, I have been criticized for not mentioning Gaza enough in my videos, or people being ghosted for not being concerned enough about Gaza. So that's an example. Moralistic. Neptune is ruled by Jupiter. You must be concerned about the Palestinians. You must be concerned about Gaza. You must see it as a genocide. And so that is a way in Neptune and Pisces has been working. There have been other things, and I don't want to devalue anything, but people have been very concerned about injustice, and injustice can work in many different ways. For example, Black Lives Matter. I mean, Black Lives Matter, complete Neptune in Pisces thing, absolute Neptune Pisces. Demonstrations, Pisces, apologize, in terms of taking the whole thing further. Pisces, people are supposed to apologize to their colonial heritage if their society or their ancestors had in the past had anything to do with slavery. You've got to atone for that. This is all Pisces, and don't forget that. Never forget that Jupiter rules Pisces. It absolutely does rule Pisces, and I think you can see Jupiter's rulership of Pisces in the moralizing, because Jupiter is essentially a very moral planet. It is the most moral planet. That doesn't mean to say the morality is good, but there is this strong sense of getting on a moral high horse with Jupiter and Pisces, and of course Pisces and morality and thinking about minorities, thinking about small minorities, the whole transgender thing. I mean, I know that transgender, the concept of transgender, really important of transgenderism, it's become slowly more important since the Second World War. People have been talking more about it, but it's kind of gone into hit a new level while Neptune has moved into Pisces. That it's this idea that you have perhaps a fairly small minority of people, and you've got to give in to what they're saying. You have to sort of completely change your legal system. No, not your legal system. You've got to change laws. You've got to have you've got to sort of open spaces for them, and you have got to totally change the way you think because of what some small minority does, and that small minority at an unconscious level may be manipulating the fact that Neptune has been moving through Pisces, and of course Pisces is a mutable sign. So mutable sign, this concept of gender fluidity. And that gender fluidity being endorsed by society because society has just taken it all on board. That is about Neptune in Pisces. And, of course, Donald Trump, he got elected at the end of 2024 just as Neptune was starting to move into Aries. And that did change a great deal. And then, in Britain, the Supreme Court, the British Supreme Court, ruled that a woman is a woman, and that's a kind of I don't know the precise details. That is this idea that maybe Neptune in Pisces is starting to come to an end. This sort of Pisces emphasis is coming to an end. Now, as far as this particular iteration of it and where we are now. So what happened is 2025, Neptune was moving through Aries for a lot of the time. And then when was it? Neptune moved into Aries. Neptune moved into Pisces again on October the 22nd, 2025. So from October the 22nd to today, January the 26th, 2026, those few months, Neptune's been in Pisces. And I think that we've seen some aspects of Neptune in Pisces, certainly in terms of the US. So, for example, you look at ICE and all of the protests about ICE. And it's... that's an aspect of what's happening in America. There's a lot of compassion there. Compassion for immigrants, or not even immigrants, citizens just being picked up off the street. And of course, in the latest thing, we've got the shooting of Alex Pretty, and this in Minneapolis. And so this happened just as Neptune was about to change sign, moving in from Pisces into Aries. And I'm thinking about that, and it's kind of like, if you look at the demonstrators and you look at ICE and the federal agents, how they're responding, it's all very Pisces, isn't it? Pisces just responds. So you have these demonstrators. They demonstrate compassionately, because through their compassion, I'm saying that's what they feel, compassion. I'm not giving any value judgment about demonstrating about ICE behavior. But then you've got the ICE agents themselves, and really, they're behaving in a Neptune and Pisces way as well. They are responding, perhaps, people getting shot in the face, blinded, whatever. And so you've got this Pisces working on both sides of things. And just don't forget, Jupiter rules Pisces. So you've got those protesting against ICE. You see Jupiter in Pisces, you see the moral high horse there, and then you've got the ICE, we have got our responsibility, we have got to do this. These demonstrators, they're standing in the way of the law, and you've got a big problem. And this is how Neptune in Pisces is all coming together, and how it's working, and it's not easy. And I think it doesn't help the fact that Neptune is on skeet. So just before Neptune moves into Aries, it also is on skeet, this fixed star associated with it. So what happens when Neptune goes into Aries? I mean, historically, we can look at Neptune moving into Aries. We can look at these times when Neptune moves from one thing to another. So it happened in 1862, beginning of 1862, and it happened when did it happen? In the end of the 17th century. And in terms of a civil war, I mean, we need to think about the American Civil War, because that was a big event taking place in America last time Neptune moved into Pisces. So the Civil War started, 1861, ended in 1865. At the end of 1861, Neptune was in Pisces. It was doing what it is now. It was moving. It had gone into Aries, went retrograde. It was in Pisces. So it briefly went into Pisces, end of 1861 and into 1862. And it finally went back into. So here's Neptune went into Pisces on October the 1st, 1861, and then it went into Aries on Valentine's Day, 1862, February the 14th. So what was that little kink about? I mean, you think about the Civil War. So the Civil War had just started. Who was winning the Civil War in end of 1861, early 1862? I'm not a Civil War expert, and I know there are a lot of people in America, a lot of you listening to me perhaps, who know about the Civil War much more than me. But as I understand it, at the time, it wasn't the Confederates were doing okay. They were certainly holding their own, and so it wasn't sure who was winning, who was losing. In fact, if anything, maybe the Confederates were winning. And Neptune moving into Aries caused the shift. Now, I mentioned the fact right at the beginning of this video that the hymn, the battle hymn of a republic, which is obviously a very, very famous song in American history, and not just America. As I said, it was certainly, Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory is a hymn I remember singing in a British public school that people, I don't know about singing, but I certainly remember that it was, they used to have the band as well, so they would take it very seriously. The band would play in chapel. They didn't always play with every hymn, but so it was quite a big thing, and people enjoyed sort of belting it out. But the Battle Hymn of a Republic is so Neptune in Aries. It is about action. It is, in a way, about morality, but it's not like Jupiter. You've moved beyond morality. I mean, I said that Neptune in Pisces. Pisces is a moral sign because it's ruled by Jupiter. That's something that's forgotten. If one gets obsessed about, if one has this idea that Neptune rules Pisces, one really doesn't get to grips with Pisces as a sign. It's kind of misleading. One forgets that Jupiter rulership, and so. But now you've moved beyond reality, but beyond morality, and you're talking about action. And this is when the time when the Civil War started to define itself. This was a war about slavery, something like the Battle Hymn of a Republic sort of manifested, and you start to have clear goals. This is what you need when Neptune is in Aries. And this is why I think Neptune is a pointer. I think we should. It's a pointer, but it's Neptune, it's transpersonal. So we start to think about, where we're going to. And now we've got to think, this is what it's about. Forget all the moralizing. Yeah, we can be moral, but we've got to take action. We've got to win this war. This war has to be won. And we appreciate leaders. That is another aspect of Neptune moving into Aries. And we want clarity. And clarity can sometimes be resolved through war. And if you going back to the 1860s, in the 1860s you had it wasn't just a civil war going on. You had some serious things going on in Europe. You had the drive towards German unity. You had the rise of Bismarck. I mean, Bismarck became German Chancellor when Neptune was in Aries. You had Italian unification. So that's really this was a time where you had to bring Italy together. And additionally, papal infallibility when Neptune was in Aries. I think Neptune in Aries, papal infallibility. I can't remember. It's one of the James Joyce books. It was either Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man or Dublin. I'm not quite sure which one, where he describes the moment where the Pope became infallible. Of course, what papal infallibility means is when the Pope is acting ex cathedra, from his throne, he is infallible. That doesn't mean he's infallible as an ordinary human being, but they made that decision, and Joyce describes this this cardinal arguing against papal infallibility in Rome until the very moment that papal infallibility was agreed, and then he just sat down. And so Aries, infallible. Neptune, you could say, is the Pope. It's a spiritual energy, and so that's what you have to do. And of course, why would papal infallibility have been brought about? I think it was in 1870. That was because the papal states had been reduced to just a small part of Rome, and so papal infallibility was perhaps a way of just asserting your authority against, this perhaps a spiritual authority, when you have lost so much material and political authority in terms of what you control in Rome. So through the 1860s, people are looking for leadership, and you can have wars to resolve things. And you go back to the last time Neptune was in Aries. Before that, Neptune went into Aries in 1698. I think March the 1st, 1698. And I'm thinking about the UK. Britain had just thrown off James II, and Britain was looking for leaders, and there was this guy called what was his name? John Churchill. So John Churchill, relative of Winston, ancestor of Winston Churchill, and so he was a soldier. He'd been an effective soldier for James II. He'd put down a Protestant rebellion, but he wasn't trusted, and I think he even spent some time in the Tower. But in the end, he found the favour again of the establishment, and he became the Duke of Marlborough, and he was a great sort of military leader. He's one of Britain's military heroes in the early 17th century, early 18th century, during the wars of the Spanish Succession. For example, the Battle of Blenheim and so forth. So again, that's Neptune in Aries. You have these wars to resolve something. What happens, with the end of Spanish, again, I'm not an expert on this period of history, but, when Spanish power retreats, what fills its vacuum? Of course, the French want to be involved, and Britain decides to get involved. This is a very Neptune in Aries thing to do. And going further east, who was emperor? Who was czar at the beginning of the 17th century? Well, beginning of the 18th century was Peter the Great. And Peter the Great, he was conducting a massive war. I mean, he was conducting wars on, all fronts. He had this massive war against Sweden, which he eventually won. I think he had the Battle of Poltava in 1709. So Peter the Great was really getting himself together. He was very pro-Western. He introduced a tax on beards as Neptune went into Aries, but that's what he wanted. So I think we get this idea of unifying wars, and that's very much what the past was about. And so, as far as what the present is about, does this mean we're going to have a European war? Well, it's kind of I don't know. I'm not saying we are going to have a Europe. We've already got a war in Ukraine, of course, which is called the rolling on. And one shouldn't forget that Russia's war against Sweden went on for a very long time. And in fact, Russia's war against Sweden did cover a sort of similar area from what we're dealing with now in Ukraine. I mean, for example, one of Peter the Great's great victories was the Battle of Poltava in 1709, and Poltava is the kind of town that might come into play. I mean, Poltava is not in the Donbass; it's further west than that, but it's in central Ukraine. It's quite possible that Poltava could come into play if you look at a map, and so you could kind of associate Russia with its clarity. I mean, the thing about Russia in terms of Neptune in Aries is they have absolute clarity. They have clarity about what they want. When you've got Neptune in Aries, you need clarity. People who are clear about what they want are the ones who are going to be successful with Neptune in Aries. If you're someone like Keir Starmer, U-turning, all this kind of stuff, absolutely not. When Neptune goes into Aries, if you think things are bad for Keir Starmer now, when Neptune goes into Aries, it's going to be disastrous for him. Keir Starmer will be totally out of the, out of anything that anyone can possibly imagine. So I just saw the news that there was a potential rival to Keir Starmer who wanted to stand in a by-election to get into Parliament, this man Andy Burnham, and Keir Starmer blocked him. And this is and then the National Executive Committee. It's a really disastrous thing to do. And he will find out how disastrous it is when Neptune goes into Aries. People want leadership. Blocking someone, blocking a potential leader. Labour needs a new leader. And they need... Starmer is so out of touch with the incoming Neptune in Aries way of looking at things. That's what people want. If you're a weak leader, you have not got a chance with Neptune moving into Aries. You've got to be strong, and perhaps this is Russia's advantage. And given the fact that 2 iterations ago Russia was having a war with Sweden and was actually liberating capturing, however you want to say it, parts of what is now Ukraine. It's kind of, some things don't change, and so we really have to think about that in terms of yourself, whatever you're doing. Those that show leadership are the ones who are going to be successful. And if you are weak, and if you U-turn and you can't make up your mind, maybe it worked while Neptune was in Pisces. It is not going to work when Neptune is in Aries. I think I must make that clear. And so, as far as what is happening now, Neptune moving into Aries, we should also not forget that Saturn is about to move into Aries. And if I'm looking at the newspapers and the internet news, the impression you get, for example, in America, that everything is just looking really bad for Trump. Maybe that's not true, but they're saying these ICE killings, what happened with Alex Pretty in Minneapolis, it's not going well. Even the NRA are apparently questioning, what these federal agents are doing. So, it looks pretty bad. The questions about the economy, but we should not forget that people want leadership. That's what people want. People don't want democracy; they want leadership at the moment. And I'm kind of, I'm thinking of, Kent State. Do you remember Kent State? What was that, 1970, 1971? When the National Guard in Ohio, they shot these students down in 1971. They were demonstrating against Vietnam, and they were shot. Completely outrageous event. Just shot in cold blood. If you think the federal agents are bad now, think back to Kent State. And 1972, that was the election following Kent State. Nixon was re-elected by a landslide. And of course, Neptune wasn't in Aries then, but it just shows how things are going to work. And we shouldn't forget that Saturn is moving to Aries. Saturn is a planet that is associated with the Democrats. And Saturn going into Aries, I think that Neptune moving into Aries is, in the American context, is probably, all things being equal, not going to favor the Democrats. All the Republicans have to do is show leadership. It doesn't even matter if it's bad leadership. They have to show leadership and they have to show strength. If the Democrats think that we're still in Neptune and Pisces land and can talk about compassion and sensitivity and so forth, they'll get it wrong. So I think that might be what happened. So the question is, people might be thinking, Neptune in Pisces. We've had this incredible Neptune in Pisces, terrible Neptune in Pisces event, with this Alex Pretty thing, and it's, clearly the Republicans have to get themselves together. This kind of reminds me, kind of what's part of what's happening is, the strategy is that if you want to destroy someone, you always turn up. So, for example, in the late 1970s, I don't know if you were around, if you're in British, there was a far-right political grouping called the National Front, and what would happen was the National Front would, they'd have a lot of demonstrations. They got a fair amount of support. They were never going to win any members of Parliament, but there was another group called the Anti-Nazi League, and the Anti-Nazi League would always show up at National Front demonstrations. And the thing is, the Anti-Nazi League would be quite provocative, and they would provoke the National Front into acting in a kind of a violent way. And by doing this, they just discredited the National Front. And as far as the Anti-Nazi League was concerned, they didn't care. They were there to fight fascism. And so they didn't care about their own reputation. All they had to do was provoke. And I'm kind of thinking that the demonstrators against the ICE deportations are kind of rather like the Anti-Nazi League. You you turn up to these demonstrations and you incite the ICE or the federal agents to use excessive violence, to shoot and whatever, even to kill, job done. Because what you're doing is you are discrediting Trump's desire to have his mass deportations of illegal immigrants. So you could say that it's been quite effective, and part of the effectiveness is the fact that these people getting blinded, the federal agents using excessive force, and obviously that's not consciously what the demonstrators were planning on, but they're creating a Pisces situation, real Neptune in Pisces situation, and so they're doing a good job, you could say, in terms of discrediting a major plank of Trump's policy. The question is, what happens when Neptune moves into Aries? And I think that Neptune in Aries, it could in the end sort of backfire. I mean, obviously the federal government has to get things under control, but they could kind of twist this around, because people are looking for leadership. They're not looking for good leadership. They're looking for any leadership, and I think that's perhaps the dynamic that we've got. And so I think that I know that it's looking perhaps pretty good to the Democrats in terms of the midterms, but I wonder how long that's going to last for. And I think that Neptune in Aries, and particularly Saturn is going in Aries, is going to certainly have a toll on the Democrats, and things might not be quite as good as things seem. One shouldn't forget that Nixon, in spite of Nixon having completely excessive behaving almost like a dictator at times, ignoring Congress, he still won a landslide in 1972. So those are a few thoughts on Neptune in Aries, kind of random thoughts. But I mean, I think it certainly is. It certainly is a big change, and my advice to you with Neptune Aries: be a leader. Whoever you are, you've got to show leadership. You've got to show yourself to be very definite about what you want, and there can be no U-turns. Sometimes you have to have a U-turn. There can be no real U-turns. You've got to be very definite, because that's what people are going to appreciate when Neptune is in Aries. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.